Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today around getting to know the 5th edition of the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring. We're going to give folks a minute to get settled here. I know we have a lot of folks signed up for this today, so give us a minute here to let folks get settled, and we'll get started in just a minute. I hope everyone is having a good National Mentoring Month so far. And for those of you that are going to be attending the National Mentoring Summit here at the end of the month, we look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. Okay. Well, Rachel, if you're ready, I think we can go ahead and get started here. And we may still have some folks trickling in and joining us, but in the interest of time, let's get underway. Welcome, everybody. I am Mike Geringer, the Senior Director of Research and Quality at Mentor at our national office. And it's a real pleasure to be with you today to talk about a product that we are very excited about and one that I think will have a lot of meaning and value for the youth mentoring movement nationally, and that is the new 5th edition of the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, which was released here this week on Monday. And we're just very excited to talk with you about this today and teach you a little bit about what you will find in the pages of this new resource that we've put together for you all. So as I mentioned, I am Mike. Already introduced myself. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Rachel Bennett. She is the research manager at our national office. Rachel, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Great. And I also, not helping us present, but I think maybe joining us in the audience today is Dr. Carla Herrera. She was a huge contributor to this and actually was really the lead author on much of the content of this resource. And so the three of us actually were the authors of the new elements here. So you're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, about what we've created and this resource that Mentor is making available to the field. So welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to quickly run through some housekeeping, some just introductory content here. Then I'm going to hand things over to Rachel to talk about the history of this resource and kind of why we wanted to create a new edition at this moment in time. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what's in this new edition and some of the great new content in there. And kind of what you can expect to see when you open up the resource and start using it in your work. And then we're going to really end by talking about exactly that, how you can use this tool in your work. And that doesn't matter if you're a practitioner or a funder or a researcher. This has got something to offer everybody that's involved in the youth mentoring movement. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then how you can use this resource to help improve the quality of your mentoring services over time. We're also going to pause for Q&A at a few points in time. So we will be using the Q&A feature here in Zoom for that. So make sure that you're putting questions in there if so. So we are recording this session, so don't worry that you have to take copious notes as we go. We'll be sharing out a recording and I believe making a copy of these slides available to folks. Just know that that's coming. We'll send a follow-up email with all of that stuff in it. As I just mentioned, we will answer questions throughout. Jake, I'm assuming they've got access to the Q&A feature. If they don't, we can just use chat and do Q&A through that. And then really, I also want to kind of just right off the bat say this resource is already out. You've probably seen an announcement about it already, but if you haven't gone and checked it out, we have a whole brand new microsite kind of dedicated to this resource. So you see the URL there, just eepm.mentoring.org. It's a whole website that's got, almost all of the content of this resource available as a kind of interactive website that you can click around and easily access. You can also get your hands on the PDF copies of the resource there. We'll go through a little bit more detail about the different iterations of the product and where you can get your hands on them later in the webinar. So I'm going to turn things over to Rachel now to just talk a little bit about what this resource is. We assume many of you have some familiarity with it, but if you're brand new to the mentoring world, we'll talk a little bit about what this resource is and why we're excited about this new version. So take it away, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks again to all of you for joining us. Great to see so many folks from all over the country and lots of different mentoring spaces joining us today. You all are who this is for and who we had in mind as we were putting this together. So I'm so glad to have you joining us. As Mike said, some of you probably know the elements very well. Some of you might be just getting introduced with this new edition, but it is really just about providing evidence-informed guidance for folks that are running mentoring programs. So not necessarily for the mentors supporting young people, but for the folks running programs. So this resource is really grounded in key practices that all mentoring programs and all different kinds of settings should be striving to implement in their work. And it's really got a strong emphasis on kind of the staff tasks that kind of go into supporting strong, safe, and effective relationships for young people, as well as, of course, running sustainable programs. And it really is a blend of research evidence, but also practitioner wisdom. Those are both really key elements, flip side of the same important coin. So you'll see those things integrated throughout this resource. A few things that it is not, just so you folks know, it does not specify, specific models or focus as kind of the correct one, but it really does recommend, guideposts for all kinds of different programs in different settings that they should be striving for in providing quality services. This is also for really intentional, purposeful mentoring relationships and not a resource that's helpful for more of those informal or naturally found mentoring relationships. So a little history on this research. We'll go back before we come forward. This was actually first introduced as a trifold brochure back in the 90s. It has evolved a little bit since then. As it has evolved over time, the focus has really been on integrating research evidence that really started with the third edition of this resource. Our current one, big shout out to our co-author, Dr. Carla Herrera, cites hundreds of peer-reviewed journal articles. So if you are looking for a strong evidence base for practices or just to inform yourself, this is definitely the resource for you. Throughout the different iterations of this, working groups have really been a key component of kind of keeping this type of resource grounded in reality. We've had lots of amazing folks from different programs kind of offer really practical insights into what it takes to run good programming on the ground. And we're happy to say that we had a wonderful working group that we'll talk a little bit more about later for this edition as well. And this has also been a responsive resource. We know that things in our world are changing, so things in our field are changing as well. So this resource has really adapted and changed over time to respond to the mentoring movement as it's grown and how that's diversified over time. Thanks, Mike. It is guided, the elements, by a couple of kind of core principles. We've kind of got a few guideposts for ourselves that really kind of lead the direction of this research. And one of those is that no program is kind of like the right one. We know that mentoring looks really different and is being offered in lots of different ways. And this resource is more about really empowering programs to just do what they do to the best of their ability. Of course, learning about what research is out there, applying it to their setting, where it's applicable to the services that they're offering, and adapting it to their local needs, right? We know mentoring services really need to be responsive to what young people, their caregivers, and what the community really wants. Also has to take into consideration the resources available and the different values that a program might be bringing to their work. And we also have a really strong emphasis in this resource on quality. That's really kind of underscored, bolded. That is kind of the important key takeaway in this resource, is that we are, working with young people, we're intervening in people's lives, and that's serious business. So we need to make sure that we're doing that well, and not just making sure that our reach is huge, but we want to make sure that that reach is quality and safe and effective as well. So the field, lots of different stakeholders kind of utilize and refer to this resource for lots of different reasons. We know that existing programs really lean on this to kind of think about things that they're already doing really well, and think toward, maybe enhancements that they can make or doing it even better. For startup programs, this can kind of be a nice guide map, a roadmap to direct them into designing their services, kind of figuring out all of those nitty-gritty details that you all know go into running a mentoring program. It's also informed funders and policymakers, sort of been an educational resource for them. So they kind of understand like what goes into running a quality mentoring program, so that they can be thoughtful about where they're putting their investments as they consider different, applicants that might be reaching out for funding. Training and technical assistance providers also will lean on this as a way to support their work with programs. They sort of use this as a starting point, a resource that programs can kind of use as they kind of think about their services and making improvements. And of course, researchers also will use this resource to kind of identify those inputs, all of those different things that kind of go into making a program that is effective and kind of working toward those youth outcomes. And so here we just wanted to talk a little bit more about like why we needed to do this, why we felt like we needed to do a new edition right now. And one of the things that we know is that it's hard to kind of achieve different desired outcomes that programs are working toward and the services that they're offering for young people. That can be, for lots of different reasons, but most often it's kind of this mismatch between how a program is designed, how it's being implemented, maybe both of those things that can make it really challenging to make sure that we're working toward whatever outcomes those are, whether we just want youth to feel like they belong more, maybe we're doing more targeted work, we're looking to have a reduction in substance use, whatever the kind of the goal is. That was one of the big reasons that we did this new edition. We really wanted to provide programs with some practical advice on designing your program and implementing it as well. Like we talked about a little bit before too, we know that our field has changed. We know that there are all kinds of different programs, from online programs to group programs. There's all kinds of different mentoring happening in all different kinds of spaces. So we really wanted this new edition to be responsive to that. Regardless of your setting, we really wanted this to be a useful resource for folks doing this work out in the field. So regardless of your model, the outcomes or other type of supports, maybe your program's integrated into a larger organization, there's something that's going to be helpful for you in this resource. And of course, there's always new research. So we really wanted to kind of pull in what the field of mentoring research has kind of shared and found in the last decade or so. So a lot of that new evidence has been integrated into this edition. And our field is also changing, right? Our field is evolving. We needed kind of modern advice for the modern mentoring program. And then above all, we wanted this to be accessible, right? Like this is a long resource. Anybody that has already kind of gone to the website and checked this out, you can see that this is like nearing 300 pages, but it's a very usable resource. We wanted this to be kind of broken down and bucketed into different areas so that you are able to pick this up and really kind of get the support and information that you need to improve services. And here, like I had mentioned, the Elements has always kind of leaned on the expertise of practitioners and folks in the mentoring field to help inform our work in crafting this resource. And this was the working group that Mike, Carla, and myself had the pleasure of working with. The different columns here, so the folks on the left side of your screen in the blue, these are all of our program folks. You'll see kind of a variety. We've got folks that are working in really, really large scale programs. We also have folks that are working in kind of smaller, more grassroots programs. we really wanted to make sure that we had a wide variety of perspectives, folks running different kinds of programs, so that we were able to really kind of consider all the different nuances of what mentoring looks like in the field. In our middle column are our mentoring researchers. These folks helped us kind of think through the new evidence that's available as we kind of updated this resource. And the folks to the right in that red text are our incredible mentor affiliates throughout the country that helped us think about this resource and making sure that it was useful. These folks sat with us in a lot of meetings for a long time to make sure that we got this right. So we could not have done it without them. So a big shout out to all of them. And of course, our sponsor, Altria, funding is always important. So it could not have happened without their support as well.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. I'm about to dive into kind of what folks can find in this new edition. Before we do that, Jake, I saw there was probably some questions popping up for folks. Anything about kind of that history of the EPM and why we did this new edition? Anything we should probably address before moving forward?
I don't think so. I think some of the questions we can answer later, but nothing about the history.
Okay, great. And I realize I forgot to mention and introduce our colleague Jake Sullivan from our office in Boston. So thank you for driving behind the scenes here, Jake. Always appreciated. So you're probably wondering, thanks for that overview of the history of this, but I'm more interested in what's in the new edition. So let's dive into that and really explain some of what you will see in the new product. So I think speaking at a very broad level, I want folks to really understand a few things that are really kind of fresh and new in this edition. You will see a lot more emphasis on program values and ethics. Now, you might be wondering, why are you talking about program values and kind of ethical principles of this work? Well, as Rachel mentioned earlier, a mentoring program, if you think about it, is really an attempt to change the trajectory of someone's life, right? And so there are definitely ethical considerations in how we do that well and kind of the guideposts that should guide us in our decision making around how we do that work and how we do that safely and with love and ensure that these are positive experiences and not harmful experiences, right? We unfortunately have a strong body of research showing that when a mentoring relationship goes really sour, it can leave a young person kind of worse off than if they'd never had that relationship. And so there's some really important ethical things to consider around that. But I mostly wanted to talk about program values in this resource, right? I think the mentoring field, frankly, has struggled with that a little bit over the years. I see a lot of programs that are grounding their work in maybe the values of their staff, or maybe, and more often, their funder, right? What do they think the people in a community need around mentoring, right? But that may not align with the values of that community, right? That may not be what those folks want from your mentoring program. And so we really start off this resource with a whole chapter dedicated to defining your program's values. What is important to you? Those could be cultural values. They could be values related to how you work with young people, strengths-based or trauma-informed or whatever those values and principles might be. But we thought it was important to name them and to have you all put some work into naming them, because in my mind, they drive how you do all of the other practices and the decisions you will need to make in all the other sections of this resource, right? So we really wanted to, now we stop short of telling you what your values should be. We don't go that far. We offer some suggestions in there around things that are important. As I mentioned, strength-based. We want to emphasize, youth voice and youth agency in this work, but the most important part is to know what the values are that are driving your work on behalf of young people and a community. You'll also find a lot more in here about theory of change and kind of program design. I still see a lot of folks in our field that are like, well, we give the youth mentors and then there's this kind of black box of a relationship. And on the other end, you get these amazing outcomes, but we can't really explain how that young person gets from point A to point B. And so there's a lot of advice in here about fleshing that out a little bit more and really being able to articulate what is the transformation that we think a young person will go through over time as our mentors work with them, right? If you can't explain that, then you probably don't know what to measure, and you certainly don't know how to improve your service delivery, right? Because you're not quite sure the journey. And it doesn't mean that every kid in your program is going through the exact same kind of transformation or even working on the same goals, but you're probably asking your mentors to do some pretty specific things with these young people. And we just want to make sure that programs have put all the intentional thought into that they should. As I mentioned earlier, there's a real emphasis in this, and you'll see information on this in every single chapter around how to integrate youth voice, caregiver voice, the broader kind of perspectives of the community in your work. Once again, the mission here is to build the mentoring services that they need and that they want, and to kind of get away from some of the adultism and kind of top-down view of the mentoring movement, right? That was very important to us in this edition. You'll also see a lot around concepts like inclusion and belonging, and I think you'll see more of this coming out of Mentor in the years ahead. It'll be an emphasis of our summit at the end of the month in DC. You know, people asked us when we were putting this edition together, is there like an Uber outcome of mentoring? Is there an ultimate thing that we should be striving towards for young people? And look, that's going to look different in all kinds of programs. Some of you are working with third graders that just need to feel more confident. Some of you are working with 22-year-olds that are going back and getting a GED. Some of you are working with, the whole spectrum of youth and the focus of what they want to get out of mentoring. But I think every mentoring program in this world can do two things, regardless of what they're focused on. They can help young people figure out who they are, build their identity, and they can help them feel like they belong in this world. And I don't care what your program is about. If you're not doing those two things, you're probably missing the mark at some level, because I don't think you get any of the other outcomes if kids don't know who they are and that they're accepted. So you'll see information about that in every chapter. We also really beefed up the sections around program infrastructure and staffing and capacity and evaluation, right? There's a lot that goes into running a good organization. And I've seen plenty of programs that do excellent work with the young people and excellent work with their volunteers, but unfortunately they close their doors suddenly because they run out of money, or they can't get enough participants because they're not marketing themselves well, or the staff are leaving because they're underpaid and overworked, right? And so we really wanted to give some guidance to the field around things like, how do you maintain and sustain a good organization, the business side of mentoring, if you will. So those of you that are program staff will be happy to see lots of recommendations in there around like adequate compensation, a lot of professional development services for you all. We want to grow the profession of working in a mentoring program, right? And that's a big goal of mentors, is to kind of solidify the workforce, if you will, of mentoring. And so there's a lot that you will see in here that I think will help programs do that side of the work a little bit better. I want to walk folks through the overall structure of it. As Rachel mentioned, I think the full PDF version of this is like 270 pages, which is okay, because I think the comprehensiveness of this resource is kind of the point. But I do want to give folks a kind of bird's eye overview of what you'll find. You will see that it's divided into 3 sections. I've already talked quite a bit about that first one, what we call foundations of quality programs. That's your values and why you do what you do and kind of the principles that go into it. And then that strong program design, right? Can I explain how our work is transformative of young people? Can I explain why our staff does what they do to support those mentors as they work with the young people, right? Really putting a finer point on that. I'd like our field to get away from what I call the hope and pray model, where we just give them mentors and hope that something good happens, right? I think we can do better at that. And I've seen our field growing in that way, but we really wanted to emphasize some of that in this edition. Section 2 is the part that, if you're familiar with prior iterations of this resource, This will be most familiar to you. This is kind of the day-to-day stuff that you do to deliver mentoring relationships to young people and work with your mentors. So this covers everything from recruiting those participants to kind of enrolling them, certainly screening your mentors to make sure they're safe and suitable to be working with kids. A lot of training and preparation, right? We put a lot of effort into training mentors, but sometimes we don't put enough effort into preparing that young person for their role in this relationship, or maybe their caregivers and how they can support that relationship. So you'll see a lot of good advice around that. Then how do we make these relationships? So if you're a program that does intentional matching of folks, what are the right things to be thinking about as I create these matches? That's true even if you're in a group program, right? What are the group dynamics and personality types I need to be thinking about as I put together my groups? And then a lot in these final two elements in this section, supporting mentoring relationships and then ending them well, right? Eventually these relationships will come to an end, and we all have an obligation, I think, to make sure that those closure experiences end on a good note, right? Even if the relationship wasn't totally successful, there's still a learning opportunity for everybody involved about kind of the experience that they went through. And so we really give a lot of advice around, how to help folks transition out of these relationships and really ideally celebrate the time that they had spent together in that relationship. Section 3 gets into a lot of those program capacity and infrastructure topics I just mentioned, program leadership and staffing, community engagement. Element 15 covers a whole bunch of ground from like marketing and communications and insurance coverage and IT infrastructure, data management, all that stuff. Obviously, the focus of this resource is not, nonprofit management, but we felt it was important to include a lot of that stuff in there because I think that's, once again, something that can impact the quality of a program. Is if Section 3, if those things are struggling in your organization, you're going to have a hard time delivering on the stuff in Section 2 here. We also end with a really wonderful chapter around program evaluation. Dr. Herrera really wrote a nice treatise on what we recommend programs do in terms of evaluation. And it's not just outcome evaluation, right? It's process evaluation, measuring the implementation of your work. I read a lot of evaluations of mentoring programs in my job, and I can tell you not all of them hit the mark on their outcomes. And in those that don't hit the mark, I guarantee you can see the seeds of that failure in their implementation, right? They either didn't train all their mentors properly, or they're lax on the supervision of those relationships. So they're not problem solving, they're not troubleshooting matches, and then people quit because they're frustrated. There's a lot that goes into that. And so, we really encourage folks to evaluate their work and not just the outcomes, but their own delivery on it. In real life, are you delivering the services that you say you do on paper in your operations manual, right? You'd be surprised how hard that can be for programs. So I really encourage folks to look at that evaluation chapter. Everyone wants to do an evidence-based program, but to me, the best evidence you could ever have is the research you do on your own program. That's the most important evidence of all, I think. You might also notice that we're calling these chapters elements now. I have to give a shout out to my colleague, Michael Karcher, who came to me about 2 years ago, and he's like, you call it the elements, but there's nothing in here that's an element. And I'm like, that's a good point. We should probably fix that. So we renamed these sections into elements. Someday when I have free time, I will come up with a graphic that looks like a periodic table of the elements and kind of place these in there. But that's for another day. But if you're wondering why they're called elements, we decided that was a good name for the building blocks of a quality program. I want to quickly walk you through what you will find in each chapter, and each chapter in that, each element is kind of presents you with the same information. So you will see this kind of repeated from chapter to chapter. They all start off with the standard of practice, and that is basically a one-sentence description that tells you as a practitioner what it is you're aiming for around mentor recruitment, for example, right? What is the standard that we expect people to try and meet? Below that, we used to call these benchmarks in previous editions. We just call them practices that support that standard, right? So These vary in number from chapter to chapter, but these are the specific things we think program staff should do that would get you maybe to that standard. We also offer a lot of nuanced information, and this is really one of the big innovations in this edition around different types of settings and different program models, right? Now, there's a million iterations of what mentoring looks like in your organizations, but we wanted to include some additional information, say for group mentoring programs, right? I'm not making one-on-one matches, so matching is going to look differently. I might need to recruit people differently for a group experience than a one-to-one experience, right? So we talk about that in each chapter. What if I'm a peer-to-peer program and my mentors are also young people? They might need more supervision. They might need more training. What do those things look like if I'm doing peer mentoring? E-mentoring, we might never have our participants in the same room ever. So that's clearly going to change how we do certain things about this work. What if we're at a school or a site-based program and so forth? I also want to really mention this last category. I know that for many of you, you're delivering mentoring within some other kind of youth development or youth serving context. That might be an after-school program, a summer camp, a hobby club, whatever it may be, right? And in those settings, there's often not a lot of the kind of volunteer-led mentoring. It's often staff are kind of available to mentor, kind of a free-range model of mentoring, if you will. And that's okay. That's a great way to deliver mentoring to young people. But it means that functions, practically a little bit different than a Big Brothers Big Sisters, for example, might work, right? And so we wanted to offer a lot of good advice to folks that are just doing youth work of some kind that want to kind of graft some mentoring onto that, right? We could probably argue to the end of the time about what defines a mentoring program, but there's mentoring happening in all these places. And we really got a lot of great support from some staff at Boys and Girls Clubs of America and thinking through those sections and kind of what does it look like when mentoring is a little bit less formalized, but is still happening, right? We wanted to try and give some guidance around those types of settings as well. Each chapter also includes a really rich and detailed kind of discussion essay that explains why we're recommending what we're recommending. Dr. Herrera took the lead on these, and I can tell you really wrote an absolute treatise on kind of what we know about the science of running a good program. We also got a lot of practitioner voice and a lot of practitioner wisdom in there, right? So this will help you explain why to say your board of directors or your funders, like why we need to do things a certain way. Here's what the research says around it. It may even be helpful in grant writing and things like that, right? If you need to explain why you do what you do and why you do it. So I really encourage folks, if you really want to dive into what we know from an evidence-based perspective about any of these tasks within a program, Carla just really knocked it out of the park with those. We also offer some reflection questions to help you think about these concepts. There's also tips for integrating youth voice into all of this work. We offer some potential metrics you might want to track. We even offer additional recommended reading if the 300 pages of advice we've given is not enough for you. There's other resources out there that can help you figure out how to do this work. So I think real quick, what you can expect when you dive in is just, once again, a really comprehensive set of advice and recommendations for mentoring programs. I think this edition is easier to kind of understand and follow. But I really want to emphasize this third bullet. Our goal here was to empower all of you to make good decisions and build the program that your community needs. This is not about compliance with what Mentor thinks the best way to run a program is. It's really about giving you the information you need so that you can make informed decisions about how to best deliver mentoring to your kids, right? And so I really encourage you to lean into that. We certainly have opinions about what constitutes a well-run program, but it's really up to all of you to kind of take that advice and blend it with your community's perspectives and the resources you have at your disposal to just maximize what it is you're offering kids in your communities. So I know that was a lot of information. Jake, let's pause here for maybe 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about where folks can get this and how they can use it.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions in the Q&A so far. One is about just other recommendations. It looks like this person just wants to learn more and get more involved. So besides the long-standing conference in DC, are there any other conferences or summits that focus on mentoring, specifically youth adult mentoring, looking to attend others if they're out there? Do you guys have any recommendations or thoughts?
Yeah, well, I will say that the national summit at the end of this month is kind of our big offering to the field, but we've got state and kind of regional level affiliates all over the country, and they all, I think, offer some kind of annual conference or convening. They're also always offering like ongoing training stuff, right? So they will do webinars, they will do in-person events. And so I would say, depending on where you're at in the country, we've got a listing of those affiliates on our website. And I would encourage folks to check those out. If you happen to be in a state where we have an affiliate, I guarantee they're going to be offering something that you could take advantage of almost every month of the year here. There are other organizations out there that do really good work, folks like Youth Collaboratory and others. But you know, I think you know, our affiliates are a good one-stop shop. If they don't offer what you're looking for, they can probably point you in the right direction for who is.
Thank you. And kind of another question about a resource. So this person is an educator who teaches about youth mentoring. And this person is wondering if there is an updated version of something like the Handbook of Youth Mentoring, second edition. This resource, meaning the EEPM, is excellent, but does anyone know of a textbook that could be used also?
Yeah, I don't know if there's another like textbook that covers the research as well as that handbook, but I mean that handbook's, you know, dated at this point. I would say that the discussion sections in each chapter of this resource really cover a lot of that same ground. I mean, Carla basically wrote a summary of like, here's everything we know about mentor recruitment from a research perspective, right? Here's everything we know about how to properly train mentors, both content and how to deliver it and so forth. So I would say these chapters are probably about as close as you'll get to a scholarly publication like that. I know the handbook covered, you know, some macro level topics that are beyond kind of how to run a program topics, but I think this work from Carla is about as close as you'll find in the field in terms of a single resource that covers that.
And I'll also just note that each of our elements or chapters also included a section about resources. So you've got lots of different links to kind of direct you to, you know, tools, other resources, and websites to get more information as well. But as Mike said, they're pretty comprehensive and digestible in the way that Carla has written those.
Yeah. And we provided citations for every claim that we're making in there, right, where there was some research to cite. So there's a pretty comprehensive references section in each of those chapters. So if you have access to peer-reviewed journals and stuff, you can probably find a lot of that information through those listings.
Thank you. And then there are two questions that are pretty similar, asking about how does this new edition affect other resources. So the first one is, you sort of mentioned it on how you tied other models into the EEPM, but will the new 5th edition impact how we use or approach the existing EEPM supplements like the e-mentoring or LGBTQ supplement?
Yes. So one of the things that we tried to do with this edition was to take a lot of that advice from those kind of supplementary publications we'd put out on the last edition and weave them into this. So all of the good advice from that group mentoring supplement, really a lot of it has been incorporated into here. Now, we didn't do that for all of those supplements that we'd done. We had to draw the line somewhere, but I would say almost all of that advice wound up in this new edition, maybe with a little less detail and nuance than you'd find in those dedicated publications. A lot of the stuff around, I'm glad someone mentioned the supplement we did around mentoring LGBTQ plus youth. A lot of that got integrated into the advice here around inclusiveness and belonging. We also wove in things from, we did one of the supplements on youth with disabilities. That's also an inclusion set of considerations. So a lot of that advice got woven in here, and I want to give a shout out to Dr. Christian Rummel, who was our partner on that LGBTQ plus supplement. He actually reviewed this entire new edition and made recommendations on how to strengthen the advice we were giving around working with all kinds of groups of young people, but that group in particular. So I think a lot of that advice from those supplements got woven into this edition. So if you still find value in the old ones, you can keep pulling useful information from them. But we tried to bring everything back into one core resource here, which is part of the reason it's 260 some pages long. So, but that was our intention.
And sort of similarly, someone is asking, does this edition impact the NQMS, which the National Quality Mentoring System for
Yes,
folks?
I'm glad folks asked about that. For anyone who doesn't know what NQMS is, it's a consulting thing that Mentor offers where basically there's an assessment that programs go through and kind of rate themselves on how well they're doing their work, and then work with our staff and our consultants to kind of find areas where they could do some improvement work, and then, ideally move the needle on their kind of quality of their service delivery over time. I worked closely with our director of that NQMS work to go through this like item by item. And everything that is in that assessment is in this resource and vice versa. They don't follow the exact same sequence, unfortunately, but everything that is kind of part of that QMS assessment is in here as advice and vice versa, right? We really used that actually as the starting point for putting together the advice in this edition. So we've tried to create some synergy there between some of the different offerings from Mentor. So Jake, I think in the interest of time, I'd like to move on. Please keep submitting your questions in the question panel. We'll save some time here at the end, but I think, Rachel, you're going to tell folks a little bit about beyond the website here, where they can get their hands on this product.
Yes, most importantly, right now you know everything that there is to know about this thing and what is in it. So where can you find it? So you all have the link to our microsite where you can find that, and I'm posting that again here in our chat. So this is a dedicated website specifically for this resource. It will really kind of break down each of the different chapters. It is mobile friendly as well, although I don't advise that since these are pretty long, but you can definitely take a quick peek on your phones as that's convenient. So a couple different options to access this. Through the website, of course, you can get kind of the full PDF download, all almost 300 pages of this thing. We are also going to make available a print on demand option. If you are somebody that likes to hold something in your hands and read it, I'm with you, I am the same way. So that print on demand option will be made available through Amazon. We're still ironing out a few details, but hope to have that information available by the National Mentoring Summit at the end of this month, but you can check back on the EEPM website if you are not able to attend that in person with us in a few weeks. Through the website, you can also download individual chapters or those elements. Those are somewhere around 8 to 12 pages each. So maybe you are just focusing on mentor recruitment or engaging youth and caregivers. You can just download the one that is most applicable or relevant for you, especially if you're somebody that's maybe doing training or technical assistance for a program. You can just send them that directly so you don't totally scare them by sending them a 300-page document. It's nice and digestible. A good kind of first step in for whatever is most applicable for them. As part of that, you'll also have a checklist version. So this kind of really specifies and spell out the specific, the standard of practice and the kind of the practices that contribute to that Mike was talking about earlier. So if somebody just needs a quick glance of that, these are, a half a page. They can really kind of take a look at what those key practices are at a glance. And then also in the works is a Spanish version of this. So we are hoping to get that translated to Spanish and have that available later this year.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So I think we want to wrap up here and talk a little bit about how you all can use this resource in your work. And Rachel touched on some of these things earlier, but I want to go a little bit deeper. So if you're an existing program that's been up and running for many, many years, I still think this has a lot of value to you, right? I think I encourage all of you to review this new edition, see if there are practices that you're not doing or hadn't thought about doing that you might want to consider starting to do, things that might bolster, the quality of your services. Chances are you're probably doing most of these things already, but you might realize, there's probably a way we could do it a little bit better, right? And so we really encourage you, and that checklist Rachel mentioned is a great way of kind of quickly going through it. And if you identify an area that you're like, I'm not sure we're doing that as well as we could, maybe consult the full chapter and see how you could strengthen that. As I've mentioned many times throughout this presentation, I think you could also revisit your theory of change and really kind of grill yourself about, like, what is the why behind what we have our mentors doing? And then what is our staff doing to make sure that the mentors are doing the right thing, right? There's like a trickle down effect there of how your staff influences mentors and how then mentors influence young people. There's probably some ways that the young people start influencing back up that chain as well. So really interrogating the why and making sure that your work kind of has good purpose and clarity of where everyone's going and everyone rowing in the same direction, so to speak. There's a lot in here, as I mentioned, around incorporating the perspectives of youth and families and mentors in the work. I often find they're all experts on their own experience, right? Both outside of your program, but in it, right? And so if you're not hearing from them about how your work could be improved, you might be missing important things. Aligning program infrastructure with ambition. The number one sin I see programs committing is just serving too many kids with the staff they have. And that's when you get sloppy and cut corners on match support and this, that, and the other thing. And all of a sudden you've got relationships that are not very, positive or not going well because they're not getting the attention they deserve. So I think there's a lot of ways that existing programs can use this resource to kind of just take a fresh look at what they're doing and find some ways to think about improving your quality. I think for those of you in startup mode, as Rachel mentioned earlier, this is really a roadmap to figuring out what you're going to need to build at some level. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of decision points where you, the practitioner, is in charge of figuring out how that's going to work, right? It's not mentor telling you what to do. You got to figure that out at some level. But we've really tried to provide good guidance on what you need to consider building. And I think we're particularly strong in this edition on, kind of school and site-based models. And then, as I mentioned, those kind of more general youth development programs, if you're grafting mentoring onto that in some way, there's a lot of good advice in here. If you're a funder, a policymaker, someone who invests in these types of programs, I really think this resource will be very valuable for you in helping you understand what it takes to truly deliver quality mentoring experiences, right? And that may mean that you need to give these programs a little bit more money to do their work at a higher level of quality. I mean, you do get what you pay for in this work, right? And so I often find that funders often don't understand all the details and all of the steps that go into creating mentoring relationships and maintaining them. I think for a long time, our field presented mentoring as like, oh, it's a quick and easy solution to things. Well, yes and no. I mean, it's less expensive than some interventions, but human relationships are by default messy and they will have their ups and downs. And there's a lot that goes into making them work well. I also think this resource can really help policymakers and philanthropy align the change they'd like to see in the world with what mentoring programs do well. Mentoring is not a panacea for deeply intracted social ills, but mentoring can be part of the solution for just about anything, right? We have a wealth of evidence that mentoring can help young people with just about any issue they're having trouble with or in pursuit of any goal that they want to have, right? But the key is to really know what, set your expectations properly around what this work looks like and how transformative it's going to be, right? And I think There's a lot of good reasons to invest in mentoring programs, but I have seen the funders pull our field in different directions that I think are sometimes not as helpful as they'd like them to be. And so I think this will really help anyone vet the programs that they're thinking about funding, and then over time help make sure that those programs are doing their best work. What's the point of scaling mentoring if it's going to be low quality mentoring, right? So there's a quality thing that goes along with that quantity piece. And so there's a lot of good advice in here. If you're a researcher or an evaluator, I think there's a lot of recommendations in here around key metrics to track. As Rachel mentioned, these are things that might be mediators or moderators of outcomes from a program. And like I said, I've seen a lot in the research literature about programs not probably having the impact they could because their implementation of their services wasn't really up to snuff, right? And so that's a critical part of understanding the success of a program. And so I think researchers will find a lot in here. As I mentioned, these discussion sections that Carla authored are really a nice summary of current research. So if you're wanting to know how your scholarly work can build on what we already know, she's really put together a nice summary on all these topics of what we know. So I encourage researchers and those of you doing evaluation work to also become familiar with this. It's hard to evaluate a mentoring program. They're kind of a different beast, right? I've seen a lot of evaluators that, oh, I can evaluate youth programs, and then they get to mentoring and they're like, yeah, this works a little differently. And so I think this will really help with that kind of nuance. Things to contemplate as you all review these practices, really, Rachel and I have said this throughout, but just think about where you might align with these and where you might want to do things differently. I will say this right now, you will not do every practice that we recommend in this publication. There are going to be places where you do it differently, or you maybe don't do it at all. That's okay. But I think my recommendation would be, evaluate that, see if it's working. I mean, I like to say that everything we consider to be a best practice in mentoring now started off as someone doing it wrong, measuring it, and finding out that it actually worked better to do it that way. So don't be afraid to innovate. Don't be afraid to do things a little bit differently, but do think about how these practices apply to your setting, the types of youth you're working with, the staff you've got available, where you're at in your program's life cycle, how matches meet and where and when. All of that is going to influence how you think about implementing these practices or not, right? But you have the power to make those kinds of decisions on behalf of your program participants. And I can't emphasize this enough. And I think this is an area where I'll be honest and say I think Mentor kind of was confusing in some of its messaging in the past. The elements of effective practice is not about compliance with a cookie cutter model of mentoring, right? We are not the cop of the mentoring field. We're not the compliance officer of the mentoring field. But our goal is to empower all of you as professionals that know this work to just build the best programs you can, right? And so if you want to do things differently, that's okay. Just, make sure that what you're doing is safe. I can't cut corners on the safety side of things. But then, as I said, evaluate, how well your approach is working. That is the best evidence you will ever have. If you really want to be evidence-based, study yourselves and make sure you're doing the best work you can. So we really wrote this as a tool to just give you the knowledge you need to build the best programs you can. And I'll end by saying there's a lot of support. If all of that feels overwhelming, you do not have to figure this out on your own. Mentors affiliates and an army of consultants that we've hired are standing by to offer all kinds of training, technical assistance support. All of our affiliates will be offering training on this new edition. Like, it's a very in-depth training. So if you want to really go deep, that will be available to you. But I'll also note that we have a federally funded project, the National Mentoring Resource Center, that offers free consultation support to any mentoring program in the country, as long as you're working with some youth that are 18 and under, right? This is, if you go, we don't have the URL up here, but It's just nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org. And any program in the country can request free help up to, I think, like 30 or 40 hours of someone's time to sit down with you and help you figure out some improvement you want to make in your program, right? So I really encourage folks to do that. Rachel and I will be doing, and some other colleagues will be doing, a 3-part webinar series later in the spring and summer. I think each of the 3 sections will go over those 3 kind of sections of the resource itself. So for anyone who wants a deeper dive into it than we did today, that will be coming sometime when the weather is warmer in our calendar year. And as always, if you've got questions about this, just reach out to Rachel and I at the at research@mentoring.org, and we're happy to answer any questions. Speaking of which, Jake, I think we are at time to take our final batch of questions that folks may have and wrap us up.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A box. I think between the ones we answered before and then Rachel and I have been answering some, I think we got them all, unless anybody has any last minute questions. There is a lot of gratitude and praise for you both and the whole team that's worked on this. So just wanted to elevate that. But right now I'm not seeing any other questions.
Well, we'll stick on here for another minute or two to let, if someone's furiously typing in the Q&A panel, you can finish typing. But yeah, thank you. And I'm glad to hear that a lot of what Rachel and I have talked about here today is resonating with folks in the field. I think, look, I've been in mentoring for about 30 years, and I have seen a lot of growth in this, and not just in the scale of mentoring, right? But in kind of the baseline knowledge that practitioners like all of you bring to this work, right? This field is simply a lot smarter than it was 25, 30 years ago when I saw people just kind of winging it and throwing, volunteers and kids together and hoping something good happened, right? I think we've gotten a lot better about our work and a lot more kind of frankly professional about it. And I'm excited. I think the advice here will last for many, many, many years into the future. There'll always be areas where we could grow and improve. But I think we're excited to kind of teach people about what we've put together here. And I think you will all find at least pieces of it to be valuable in your work. So, Jake, and one last call for questions here.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, Rachel, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just thanks to all of you. I know everyone is very busy, so glad for your time today. And thanks so much for the engagement and great questions. You've got our email, so please reach out to Mike and I if you have any questions for us that we didn't have a chance to address today. Everyone will get a copy of our slides with all of the links there as well. And a recording will be available through Mentor's website. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of National Mentoring Month, and hope to see at least some of you, many of you maybe, at the summit in a few weeks. But if not, I hope we can connect later this year and help you do your work better. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.